My own son looked me in the eye and said, "You're just a useless old man." That's what he said. Right there, at the dinner table. No hesitation, no shame. Loud enough for the grandkids to hear. I was passing the salt. My hand froze in the air, and for a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. But I hadn't. He meant every word. "You're just a useless old man," Eric said. "You don't help. You don't contribute. You're just in the way." Then he kept chewing his food like he hadn't just shattered something deep inside me. My name is Harold Thompson, 79 years old, born and raised in Davenport, Iowa. I was a machinist for over 4 decades. I worked in steel, real work, the kind that eats up your knees and leaves your hands full of scars. I raised a family in this house I built from nothing, buried a wife who meant the world to me. And all I've ever asked for was to spend my final years with a little peace, a warm cup of coffee, and maybe a laugh from one of my grandkids. I never asked for much, never needed anyone's money. But respect? I thought I'd earned that. But let me tell you something. That moment, that sentence, it wasn't the beginning of a fight. It was the end of a long silence. See, Eric, my only son, hadn't been a good man for years now. He got too proud, too entitled. Somewhere along the way, he forgot where he came from. Forgot who taught him to shave, who taught him to drive, who stayed up 3 nights straight when he had a fever of 104, whispering, "You're gonna be all right, son," even when I wasn't sure he would be. I just looked at him that day, looked at my boy, and I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't ask him why he said it. I just nodded, like a man who had finally accepted what he didn't want to believe. And you know what I did next? I finished my plate. That's right. I sat there in silence, chewing my meatloaf and mashed potatoes like it was any other Sunday. I didn't owe him a scene. I didn't owe him a word. But in my heart, something was shifting, something heavy, something final. I had tolerated a lot in this house. Disrespect in small doses, snide remarks, little jabs masked as jokes. But this? No. This was different. This was the day a son became a stranger to his own father. After lunch, I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were trembling, not from fear, no, from restraint, from memory. Because while Eric sat in my dining room barking insults, he didn't know what I had just done 3 days ago. I had gone to the courthouse, quietly, signed some papers, legally put the house back under my sole authority. I never told him, never thought I'd have to. But something in my gut told me to prepare, and Lord, was I glad I did. So the next morning, I got up early. The house was quiet, sun just beginning to push through the curtains. I brewed a pot of coffee, toasted 2 slices of bread, sat at the kitchen table like I always did. Then I picked up the phone and called the locksmith. "I want all the locks changed," I said. "Front, back, garage, basement, every door, today." I wasn't angry. I was done. And when he came back that evening, trying to walk in like nothing happened, I was ready. It was close to 5 in the evening. I was sitting in the recliner by the window, sipping my coffee, when I saw his truck pull into the driveway like he owned the place. Same truck I helped him buy back when he was 22 and broke, fresh out of community college with a business degree he thought made him king of the world. He parked real confident, got out holding some kind of bag, maybe laundry, maybe tools, like it was just another Tuesday. But when he reached for the front door handle and gave it a twist, it didn't turn. He jiggled it again, then again, this time a little harder. That's when the knocking started. "Dad, you changed the lock?" His voice had a mix of confusion and irritation, like I'd made a silly mistake. I didn't answer. I sat still, watching the curtain sway slightly from the breeze of the ceiling fan. My hands rested on my knees, calm. My heart? Steady. I had no doubt. No guilt. "Dad, come on. What's going on? Open up." I stood up slow, stretched a bit, walked to the kitchen and poured myself a second cup. The knocking turned into pounding, the calm tone into anger. "What the hell is this? You changed the damn locks? Dad? Let me tell you something. It's a strange thing when your own child starts calling your name like you're an inconvenience, like you're a burden, Like your home is their property. And it's even stranger when you realize you've let them believe that for far too long. I finally walked to the front door, not to open it, but to let him know I was there. I pulled the curtain back and looked him dead in the eyes through the glass. He looked shocked, not hurt, just offended, like I had somehow crossed a line, like the word useless still didn't hang in the air between us like smoke from a fire he lit. "You need to leave," I said through the door, plain and clear. "You're not welcome here." "What? Dad, are you serious right now?" "I'm serious." "You're overreacting? This is about Sunday?" "Jesus, Dad, I didn't mean it." "Yes, you did." He stepped back like I'd slapped him. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I just stared. "You've made your thoughts clear, Eric. You said I was useless, that I didn't contribute, that I was in the way. So I'm stepping out of the way. This house is mine, not yours. Not now, not ever." He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "I changed the locks. I updated the deed. I've taken your name off the emergency contacts. There's no power of attorney anymore. You're no longer responsible for anything here, and I expect the same in return." He stood there, stunned. Then his face turned red, not from sadness, but rage. I'd seen that temper before. His mother used to call it the Thompson fire. Only difference was, I used to put it out, not anymore. "You're throwing your own son out," he snapped. "After everything I've done for you." I let out a quiet laugh. "Done for me?" I said, still through the door. "You mean like calling me useless at my own table? Taking over my bills like I can't count? Belittling me in front of my grandkids? You call that help, Eric?" He didn't answer, just looked away, jaw tight. "I may be old," I said, "but I'm not stupid, and I sure as hell ain't finished." He stared at me. I stared back, and then I turned and walked away. That night was the first peaceful sleep I'd had in months. No pacing the hallway, no sitting up wondering if I'd done something wrong. Just silence, and a kind of dignity I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a small dinner, eggs and toast, and watched the sun go down over the backyard I mowed by hand for decades. It was still mine, all of it. You see, there's something folks don't talk about enough. When you get old, they treat you like a child again, like you've lost your judgment, like your memories don't matter, your experience doesn't count, and your money, well, that suddenly becomes community property, even if you worked your fingers to the bone for every dollar. Eric had been managing my bills for the last few years. I let him. After my heart attack, I figured it'd be easier. Trusted him with access. But slowly, things changed. He started deciding what I could buy, where I could go, what I needed versus what was wasteful. I noticed gas money disappearing, grocery budgets being cut, and when I asked about it, he acted like I was being paranoid, but I wasn't. So a few weeks ago, I started pulling things back quietly, visited the county clerk, closed the shared account, hired a local attorney. Eric never noticed, too busy treating me like a piece of furniture. Until now. The following day, I went to the post office and redirected all my mail back to my name. I stopped by the pharmacy and made sure all my medical authorizations were changed. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a walk through town, through the streets I used to know so well. People waved. Old friends nodded. Some were surprised I was out and about. "Feeling better, Harold?" they asked. I smiled and said, "Just getting started." Later that week, I called my granddaughter Lily, the oldest of the three. She was 16 and smart, real smart. I asked if she wanted to come by and help me clean out the garage. She said yes, said she'd bring cookies too. When she came, she gave me a hug tighter than I expected. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I'm sorry about what Dad said. We were all shocked. He was so wrong." I didn't ask her to say that. I didn't fish for sympathy. But hearing it, it meant more than I could ever explain. We spent the afternoon talking and laughing, just like old times. And when she left, she turned back on the porch and said, "You're not useless, Grandpa. You're my hero." That night, I sat in the same recliner by the window, the house quiet around me. and I thought about how easily respect can be lost, but how dignity can be taken back. One decision at a time. 3 days passed, and Eric didn't come back. Not a call, not a message, not even a knock on the door. The silence was loud, but it didn't bother me. I sat in that old house like I always had. Except now, for the first time in years, I felt like it was really mine again. I made my coffee the way I liked, played my old records, walked barefoot in the kitchen without feeling like I was in someone else's way. The air felt different, lighter. I wasn't grieving. Not anymore. I was breathing again. For too long, I had let my own son chip away at who I was, little by little, word by word, until I was just a shadow sitting in a corner. But the moment he called me a useless old man, something in me stood up. Not out of pride, out of truth. I had been through too much in this life to go out humiliated in my own home. And if that meant losing the only son I had, so be it. I'd rather live alone with peace than surrounded by disrespect. The neighbors noticed the change. Mr. Halverson from across the street waved more than usual, even brought over a bag of peaches from his garden. Said he hadn't seen me out front in years. I smiled and told him the truth. I was feeling better these days, more like myself. We sat on the porch for a while. 2 old men with tired knees and stronger hearts than most people give us credit for. He didn't ask what happened, and I didn't offer. Some things don't need to be spoken aloud. You can see them in a man's eyes. I started fixing up the place too. Not for anyone else. For me. Repainted the mailbox. Cleaned the gutters. Got rid of boxes in the garage that had been sitting there since my wife passed. I found her garden gloves in one of them, folded neatly next to a packet of daffodil seeds. I held them for a while, my fingers tracing the outline of her hands, and for the first time in a long time I didn't cry. I just smiled. She would have been proud of me. She always said I had a quiet strength, even when I didn't feel it. And now I could finally feel it too. But peace has a funny way of revealing who really matters in your life. On the 4th day, I got a visit. Not from Eric, but from Martha. She showed up without calling, stood on the porch holding a casserole dish like it was a peace offering. I opened the door just enough to look her in the eye. She looked tired, guilty, not angry, not defensive, just heavy. "I brought this for you," she said, holding it out. "Mac and cheese. I figured maybe you weren't eating much." I didn't say anything. I didn't reach for the dish. She took a breath. "I didn't know he was going to say that, Harold. None of us did. And I should have said something right then. I was just shocked." I nodded slowly. "You and I both." She looked down, then back at me. "Can I at least leave this with you?" I stepped aside and let her set it on the table near the entryway. She looked around the house, quietly. I could see her eyes land on the locks. The new keys hanging by the door. The absence of Eric's things. She knew. "He's not taking this well," she said finally. "He's embarrassed, angry, says you overreacted." I smiled faintly. "Of course he does." She hesitated. "But I don't think you did. I think maybe this needed to happen." I didn't reply. Just watched her face. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked like someone trying to choose the right side of a storm. She left without saying much more. I didn't touch the casserole. Not because I didn't appreciate it. I just wasn't ready to eat something made by a woman who sat silent while I was torn down in front of my grandchildren. Kindness, when it comes too late, tastes like dust in the mouth. That night, I sat in the backyard under the stars. Same lawn chair I've had since 1996. The wind was soft, the crickets loud. And I thought about all the fathers I've known over the years who went quietly. Men who gave everything to their families only to fade into silence as they got older. Forgotten in their own homes. Controlled by the very children they raised. I used to think that was just how things were. But now I know better. Being a father doesn't mean being a doormat. It means showing your kids how to live. And sometimes that means showing them how to draw a line when they've gone too far. The next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept all my old bank papers and started going through every single document. I made copies of everything, labeled them, stored them in a fireproof box. I wasn't planning for death. I was preparing for independence. I took control of my own retirement accounts again, called the credit card company and removed every name but mine. I called the electric company, the water, the gas, everything, all mine now. I was reclaiming what should have never been handed over. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I wasn't going to let anyone else make decisions for me again. Lily came by again that Friday. This time she brought her little brother Henry with her. "Mom said we could help you clean the shed," she said, grinning like it was a summer adventure. I let them, watching them run around in the backyard, laughing, asking questions about tools they didn't understand. It brought something warm back into the house. Henry looked up at me at one point and said, "Grandpa, do you miss Dad?" I paused, looked down at him. "I miss who he used to be." He nodded, like he understood. Maybe he did. When they left, Lily hugged me again and whispered, "I hope you never forget how strong you are." I closed the door and stood there for a moment, letting that settle. She was right. Strength doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's just a decision made alone, in silence, behind a locked door that no one else can open. And that was the first week, after years, that I finally felt like I was living for myself, without fear, without regret, and without asking anyone's permission. The next few days passed quiet, almost too quiet, but not the kind of silence that weighs you down. It was the good kind, the kind you earn, the kind that settles over a house like a warm blanket after years of cold shoulders. I woke up early, made breakfast on my own terms, walked out onto the porch with my coffee, and watched the world go by without anyone watching me. No more tension in the air, no more footsteps behind me questioning what I was doing or why. For the first time in years, I felt like this house truly belonged to me again. Not just on paper, but in spirit. Every corner of it started to speak again. The garage that used to echo with the sound of wrenches and radios. The backyard that had once held birthday parties and slip-and-slides. Even the hallway, with its old family photos, some of which I'd thought about taking down, now felt different. Not because the memories had changed, but because I had. I didn't see regret in those frames anymore. I saw effort. I saw love. I saw a man who gave everything and survived more than most people ever knew. And I saw a man still standing. I didn't hear from Eric at all. Not a text, not a knock. Not even a letter slipped through the mailbox like some half-hearted apology. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting one. My son always had a way of folding into himself when he didn't get his way. As a boy, when I told him no, he'd stomp off to his room, slam the door, and wait for me to feel bad enough to come talk to him first. As a man, he wasn't much different, just taller, louder, and meaner. But this time, I didn't go knocking on his door. I wasn't the one in the wrong. I kept myself busy. There's always something to fix in an old house. I replaced the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, patched a crack in the porch step, even restained the deck. It felt good to use my hands again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wasn't proving anything to anyone. I was reclaiming rhythm, reclaiming a part of myself that had been dormant too long. And in between all that, I started writing again, something I hadn't done in decades. Just a little notebook I kept by the recliner. Nothing fancy, no title, just thoughts, moments, memories, feelings too old to say out loud but too honest to let fade. One afternoon, I got a call from Lily. She wanted to stop by after school. No reason, just to hang out, as she said. That girl, she's got more heart than most grown folks I know. She came over with a bag of groceries, said her mom had sent a few things, just in case, but I knew it was her idea. She put the bag on the counter and pulled out a loaf of bread, some apples, and a jar of peanut butter, the good kind. I raised an eyebrow, and she grinned. "Figured you could use some snacks while you write," she said. We sat on the back steps for a while, watching the trees sway. She didn't ask about her dad, and I didn't bring him up. But after a long pause, she looked at me and said, "Grandpa, do you miss him? Not the way he is now, the way he used to be?" I thought about that for a while. I miss the boy who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. I miss the teenager who cried when he didn't make the baseball team. I miss the young man who hugged me on his wedding day and said, "Thanks for everything, Dad." But the man who sat at my table and called me useless? No, I don't miss that man at all. She nodded, and that was enough. That evening, after she left, I took a walk around the block. The sun was setting low, painting everything gold. The same street I had driven 1,000 times now felt fresh. Every porch had a story, every mailbox a secret. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just living in my house again. I was living in my life again, not surviving it, living it. When I got home, I saw something strange. A box on the front steps. No name, no note. Just a plain cardboard box taped shut. I brought it inside, placed it on the table, and opened it slowly. Inside were a few shirts, a pair of shoes, and a photo frame. One that used to sit in the hallway but had gone missing months ago. The picture was of Eric, about 7 or 8, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. His arms were stretched out like he could fly. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't need a return address. I knew who had sent it. It wasn't an apology. It was a withdrawal. He was pulling his things out, piece by piece, without ever having to face me. That was his way. Always easier to retreat than reflect. Always easier to disappear than to say, "I was wrong." And for a moment, just a flicker of it, I felt the sting. That ache in the chest that comes when you realize the door that closed might never open again. But it passed, like wind through an old screen door. Because while he was packing up his past, I was finally building my future. Even if that future was quiet and a little lonely, it was still mine. Later that week, I got a call from an old friend, Jim Halverson. Said he was going fishing up by Spirit Lake and wanted to know if I was up for the drive. I hadn't been out of Davenport in nearly 3 years. My first instinct was to say no, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the breeze that had just slipped through the screen. Maybe it was the photo still sitting on the table. I don't know, but I said yes. Packed a small bag, cleaned my old tackle box, left a note on the door, just in case Lily stopped by. Gone fishing. Back Sunday. And as I locked the front door behind me, I looked back at the house, the porch, the curtains, the mailbox with fresh paint, and I realized this wasn't the end of anything. This was the beginning. Jim picked me up at sunrise. The kind of quiet morning where the air still has that cool bite, and the sky looks washed out like it just woke up. He pulled into my driveway in the same old Ford he's had since '98. Cooler rattling in the back and rods tied down with bungee cords. I threw my duffel in the back seat, climbed in slow. My knees ain't what they used to be. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was just going. We didn't say much on the drive. Didn't have to. Jim and I have been friends long enough to know silence ain't empty. It's just comfortable. The road to Spirit Lake took us past 100 places I hadn't seen in years. Cornfields so wide they looked like oceans, silos standing like watchtowers, little gas stations where the pumps still have flip numbers, places that don't change because they don't need to. I leaned back, let the breeze come in through the cracked window, and for the first time since I changed those locks, I felt the weight really start to lift off my shoulders. Jim talked a little about his grandkids. He's got 5 now, scattered across Minnesota and Illinois. Said he hardly sees them anymore, but he doesn't mind. I taught him what mattered when they were little. After that, it's on them. That line stuck with me. I thought about Lily and Henry, how they still come around, how they look at me like I matter. And I wondered if Eric had any idea how much his own kids needed more than a man who earns. They needed a man who remembers where he came from. When we got to the lake, the sun was already high. Jim backed the boat into the water like a pro. We loaded our gear, climbed in, and set out across the still blue surface. The motor hummed low and steady. We didn't fish right away, just floated. Let the quiet settle in. I looked out over the water, and memories started rolling in like waves. Me and my wife, sitting on a picnic blanket by the water, back when Eric was still in diapers. He used to chase dragonflies with a plastic net. Laughed so hard it echoed across the trees. That boy. I used to know him. I really did. After a while, we baited our hooks and cast out. The line hit the water with a soft plunk. I watched the ripples spread and fade. Hours passed like minutes. Jim caught 2. I caught nothing. Didn't bother me. That day wasn't about fish. It was about remembering that I still had life in me that didn't revolve around disappointment. We camped out that night. Old canvas tent, campfire crackling, the smell of pine and smoke in the air. I laid back on my cot and stared up at the stars. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd constellation, I heard Jim say, "You did the right thing, Hal," locking him out. Some lines need to be drawn. I didn't say anything, just nodded, even though he couldn't see me in the dark, because deep down, I knew he was right, and it felt good to hear it out loud. The next morning, we packed up early. Jim had to be back for his wife's doctor appointment. On the way home, we stopped at a diner off Route 20. Real small-town place, vinyl booths, coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and a waitress who called everyone Hun. We ordered eggs and sausage. While we waited, I glanced out the window and saw a car I recognized. Red Chevy Malibu. It pulled into the lot, parked 2 rows down, and out stepped Martha. She didn't see me right away. She looked around like she was lost or expecting someone. Then she spotted me through the glass, hesitated, and walked in. Her eyes found mine. She didn't smile. "Harold," she said, standing by the booth. "Can I sit?" Jim stood up without a word, gave me a small nod, and moved to the counter. I motioned to the seat across from me. She sat down slow. Her hands were tight around a manila envelope. "I didn't follow you," she said. "I found the note Lily left. Said you'd gone fishing. I just needed a chance to talk." I sipped my coffee. Didn't say a word. She took a breath. "Eric's not doing well. He's spiraling. He won't say it out loud, but I think he knows he messed up. But his pride..." She shook her head. "He doesn't know how to come back from something like this." "That's not my problem anymore," I said. She looked surprised, maybe even hurt, but I didn't flinch. "For years," I said, "I was told what to do in my own house, what I could buy, what I should eat, what I was allowed to spend. He treated me like a child, and I let him, because I thought that's what trust looked like. But calling me useless..." I leaned forward. "That was the last straw. He meant it. You all heard him, and no one stopped him." Martha looked down. "I regret that. Truly." She slid the envelope across the table. I didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Just paperwork. His keys, bank access, everything. We're not assuming you'll forgive him, but..." "I won't," I said, firm but calm. "Not today. Not tomorrow. Maybe never." She nodded slowly. "I understand." We sat there for a long minute. Then I pushed the envelope back across the table. "You can keep it." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then stood up. "Take care of yourself, Harold." And with that, she was gone. Jim came back a minute later. "Everything all right?" I looked out the window again, watched her car pull away. Then I turned back to my plate. "It will be," I said. And I meant it. I didn't tell anyone when I got back home. Just stepped inside, closed the door, dropped my bag by the armchair, and exhaled. The house smelled like cedar and old coffee, familiar, warm, quiet. Everything was exactly how I left it. Keys still hung by the door. The porch light had clicked on automatically while I was gone, and the picture of me and my wife on the hallway wall caught the last glow of evening light just right. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And it felt more like home now than it had in the last 10 years. I sat in my recliner, leaned back, and just listened. No voice yelling across the house. No heavy steps pacing with frustration. No slamming cabinet doors. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft creak of the wood settling beneath my feet. I realized then how long I had lived in tension, waiting for something to snap, trying to keep the peace even when peace had already packed its bags and left. And now that it was gone, I didn't miss it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, made pancakes, real ones, not the frozen kind Eric used to complain about when I didn't cook, like Mom used to. I added blueberries, poured real maple syrup, and sat at the table alone, eating slowly. No phone beside me, no newspaper, just me, my breakfast, and a plate that stayed warm until the last bite. There was something sacred in that silence. Not loneliness, not anymore. Solitude. A man choosing his own company. A man who no longer owed anyone a version of himself that kept shrinking to make space for others. Around noon, Lily came by again. She had Henry with her and a board game under her arm. Said they wanted to play just like we used to. I didn't say no. They spread out on the living room floor like it was 2015 again, laughing, teasing each other, asking for snacks. I made popcorn, brought out some root beer from the fridge, and just watched them. They didn't mention their dad. They didn't ask questions. It was like they understood, even if they didn't know the full story. Kids know more than we give them credit for. They know who makes them feel safe. Later that afternoon, Lily helped me clean out one of the spare rooms. I told her I was thinking of turning it into a little study. Maybe put some books in there, a chair by the window. Like a writing room, she asked. I smiled. Something like that. She found an old box of letters I had kept from my wife, notes she used to leave in my lunchbox, birthday cards, shopping lists with doodles in the margins. Lily read one out loud, laughing softly at her grandma's messy handwriting. I hadn't opened those in years, but it didn't hurt like I thought it would. It reminded me of how good love can be when it's real, quiet, generous, never asking to be praised. When they left, Henry hugged me tight and said, "I like it here better now." I didn't ask him why. I just held him a little longer. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not typed, handwritten. The return address was Eric's. His office, not his home. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. It was short, no apology, no real emotion. Just a list of things he wanted to clarify, written in a cold, almost corporate tone. Said he understood I needed space and hoped I would consider a mediated conversation in the future. I folded the letter once, then twice, and slid it into the drawer where I kept spare batteries and tape. I didn't tear it up. I didn't call him. I didn't respond. Not because I was bitter, because I was done. There's a kind of peace that only comes when you stop trying to fix something that never wanted to be repaired. I spent too many years walking on eggshells, thinking if I just said the right thing or stayed quiet long enough, things would go back to the way they used to be. But the truth is, they never really were like that. I just didn't want to admit it. I wanted to believe my son was good, that the boy I raised into a man had taken some part of me with him. But maybe what he took was silence, and I wasn't willing to keep giving that anymore. Instead, I gave myself small freedoms. I started going for morning walks through the neighborhood, saying hello to people I hadn't talked to in years. I visited the local library and signed up for a senior book club, first meetings next Tuesday. I went to the barbershop, asked for a full trim, and for the first time in years, the man in the mirror looked awake. Not young, no, but alert, present, mine. One afternoon I drove out to the cemetery where my wife was buried. I hadn't been in a while, not because I didn't care, but because I hadn't felt like I had anything new to say. This time, I did. I brought fresh flowers, sat on the bench by her stone, and I told her everything. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft, steady words about what had happened, how I'd finally stood up, how I'd finally locked the door and meant it. I told her I hoped she'd be proud of me. I told her I was okay, and as I sat there, a breeze came through the trees, brushing my shoulders like a blanket. I don't know if it was her. I'm not one to chase signs, but it felt like something, like approval, like peace. When I got back home, I took off my shoes, stood in the middle of the living room, and looked around at everything I still had. A house full of memories, grandchildren who loved me, a fridge with food I picked out, a front door with a lock I chose, and a heart that no longer waited for someone who didn't know how to say sorry. That night I opened the windows wide, let the air flow through the house, made myself a sandwich, put on some old Johnny Cash, sat down and listened. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like someone's father or someone's burden. I felt like Harold again. Just Harold. And that was more than enough. It was a Sunday afternoon when the knock came. I was sitting on the porch, sipping sweet tea, watching a pair of cardinals argue over a patch of feeder space. The sky was pale blue, the kind that usually brings peace with it. My knees ached from trimming the hedges earlier, and I was just settling into that familiar quiet when I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the front door. Not the mailman, not Lily. Too measured, too unsure. I knew before I stood up who it was. I walked to the door and didn't open it. Just stood behind the curtain and looked through the glass. Eric. He was standing there in slacks and a button-up shirt, like he'd just come from church or a meeting, trying to dress the part of the man he used to pretend to be. His eyes scanned the porch, the windows, then settled on the door. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. There were lines on his face I hadn't seen before. But his posture, that was the same. Chin high, shoulders back. Pride first. I opened the door just enough to speak through the screen. "What do you want, Eric?" He cleared his throat. "I thought maybe we could talk. Face to face. I already read your letter." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured, but I wanted to come in person. Maybe I could explain." I stood there, unmoving. The breeze pushed at the door lightly, like even it didn't want this moment to last too long. "There's not much to explain," I said. "You said what you said. In front of your kids, in front of your wife. You looked me in the face and decided I was nothing. I didn't mean it that way. You meant it exactly that way." He flinched, and I watched his jaw tighten. That familiar tension. The one that always came before he tried to justify his behavior with some twisted version of duty or stress or how hard his life had been. "Dad, I know I crossed a line. I've had time to think. I let things get to me. Work's been—" I raised my hand. "Stop. You don't get to start with excuses." He was quiet. "You want to come in here? Sit at my table? Then you have to say the one thing you've never said to me in your life." He looked confused. "What?" "You have to say I was wrong. Plain and clear. Nothing after it. No but. No because. No speech." He looked at the floor. "I can't say that," he muttered. "I mean, I made mistakes, sure, but—" And there it was. I stepped back, shook my head, and started to close the door. "Wait," he said quickly. "Don't do this." I paused. "Don't do what, Eric? Don't hold you accountable? Don't expect respect? Don't finally put my dignity first?" He blinked fast, caught off guard. "I came here to try, Dad." "No. You came here hoping I'd do what I've always done. Let you in. Let it go. Pretend like nothing happened. I'm not that man anymore." His shoulders dropped. The mask slipped, just a little. "I miss the kids," he said quietly. "They won't even talk to me. Martha barely looks at me." "That's between you and them. But you're their grandfather. Can't you help—" "No," I cut him off. "You don't get to use them as a way back into my life. They come here because they want to, because they feel safe, because I don't treat them like tools. You want their trust back? Earn it, the same way you'll have to earn mine, if that's even possible." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. "Goodbye, Eric." I closed the door slowly. Not with anger. Not with drama. Just finality. A man who had finally had enough. He stood there for another minute, maybe 2. Then I heard his footsteps retreat, the engine of his car, the tires over gravel, and then silence again. But it wasn't sad. It was clean. I went back to the porch. My tea had gone warm, but I drank it anyway. The cardinals had returned, and the breeze, once uncertain, moved easy now across the yard. Later that day, I called Jim, told him what happened. He didn't say much. Just listened. Then he said, "You did what men are supposed to do. You stood for something." That night, I wrote about it in my notebook. Not to remember, I'd never forget, but to put it somewhere outside my chest. I wrote about how forgiveness without repentance is just surrender, how family doesn't excuse abuse, and how sometimes the only way to heal is to build a life where your pain isn't invited back in. I slept better that night than I had all week. The days that followed were slow in the best possible way. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The sun pouring in through the blinds, the coffee pot already warming the air in the kitchen, the familiar creak of the hallway floor. It all felt different now. Like every sound in that house had been waiting for silence, real silence, to finally speak again. I spent my mornings on the porch, my afternoons in the backyard, and my evenings with old records and new thoughts. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. Real books, thick ones that didn't blink or vibrate or demand anything from me. Just words on paper, solid, still. And in between chapters, I'd look up and realize the strangest thing. I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I wasn't waiting for the doorbell. I wasn't checking the mailbox for another excuse from Eric. I wasn't hoping he'd call. I had stopped expecting the past to fix itself, and because of that, I finally had space for something better. One afternoon, I drove out to the hardware store to get some oil for the mower. The kid behind the counter asked if I needed help carrying it to the truck. I told him I'd been lifting steel longer than he'd been alive. And he laughed, not mockingly, but with respect. When I got back, I oiled the mower, fixed a loose hinge on the gate, and trimmed the whole front yard by hand. I didn't rush. I took my time. Each push of that handle felt like another piece of my life being set right. Not because the lawn needed it, but because I did. The neighbors started noticing too. Miss Delaney, who lived 2 doors down, waved from her flower bed and said the place was looking better than ever. I smiled and said thank you, but what I really wanted to say was, that's because the man living in it finally feels like he belongs here again. That same evening, Lily and Henry showed up with ice cream and a board game. Mom said we could come by for a bit, Lily said, but I could tell it was her idea. They sat cross-legged on the living room rug while I brought out bowls and spoons. The 3 of us ate Rocky Road and played until the sun dipped below the trees, and for a while it felt like the world had been reset to something kinder, something quieter. Henry asked if he could spend the night sometime soon. I said yes without thinking twice. After they left, I stood by the door for a moment, watching their taillights fade down the street, and it hit me. I wasn't rebuilding what I lost. I was building something new entirely. Not a version of life with Eric edited back in. A new chapter that had nothing to do with him at all. That night, I found an old wooden box in the closet. Inside were photos, most of them faded, some stuck together from humidity. There were pictures of Eric as a boy, smiling, running, laughing with chocolate on his face. I looked at them for a long time, not to feel guilt, not to wish things back, just to acknowledge what was. He was a good boy once. He really was. And I was a good father to him. That mattered. Even if he forgot, I hadn't. I put the photos back in the box, sealed it, and placed it high on the shelf. Not because I needed to hide them, but because I didn't need to carry them around anymore. A few days later, I drove out to the community center. I'd seen a flyer at the library for a men's morning circle. Retirees mostly, talking about life, memory, and everything in between. I walked in, took a seat in the back, and listened. One man talked about losing his wife last winter. Another about his son not speaking to him for over a decade. There was laughter. There were tears. And for the first time, I told my story. Not all of it. Just the part that mattered. The part where I drew a line and chose myself. The room was quiet when I finished. Then one man, a tall guy with silver hair and a cane, leaned forward and said, "You didn't just lock a door, friend. You opened one for the rest of us." I nodded, not because I needed the praise, but because he understood. He really understood. That following weekend, I went to the park near the edge of town. Took a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and my notebook. I sat near the pond, watched ducks glide across the water, and started to write again. Not about pain this time, but about renewal. About mornings without dread. About porches with sunlight. About love that doesn't vanish, even when people do. I don't know if anyone will ever read these pages, maybe Lily someday, maybe no one. But they're mine. Each one a piece of ground I've reclaimed, sentence by sentence. On Sunday morning, I didn't go to church. Instead, I sat in my wife's old garden patch. The weeds had taken over long ago, but I cleared them by hand, dug my fingers into the soil, planted something new. Not because I'm good at it, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to grow something with patience. Something that didn't rush, something that didn't ask for anything but care and time. That night, as I washed the dirt from my hands and looked out the kitchen window, I saw the first little sprout pushing through the earth. Just a leaf, barely there, but alive. And I thought to myself, that's what I am now. Not finished, not broken, just beginning again. The air was starting to change, just slightly. You could feel it in the way the breeze came in a little cooler in the mornings, how the sunlight stretched longer but felt softer, how the crickets outside the window started singing earlier in the day, like they were trying to warn the leaves it was time to start turning. I noticed things like that now. I wasn't rushing through days anymore. I wasn't sitting at the kitchen table waiting for someone to come home, or someone to apologize, or someone to remember who I was. I had stopped measuring my worth by who called, who visited, who needed me. I had finally started living like a man who belonged to himself. The mailbox had been quiet for weeks, and I liked it that way. No more tension wrapped in envelopes. No more bills I didn't recognize or statements with my name second. Just simple things. Flyers, catalogs, the occasional birthday card from an old friend who still remembered how to write in cursive. I kept the ones that mattered. I threw the rest away. That alone was a kind of freedom. One morning, Lily showed up with a school project, said she had to interview someone from a different generation. I told her that was a fancy way of saying, someone old, and she laughed, said it wasn't like that. She sat across from me with a notebook and asked questions about my childhood, about growing up before cell phones, about how I met her grandma. I told her everything. Not just the sweet parts, but the hard ones too. The hunger, the work, the times I almost gave up, and the reasons I didn't. She wrote fast, eyes wide, nodding with every word like she was collecting gold straight from the earth. When we finished, she put her pen down and said, "They don't teach this stuff in school." I smiled. That's because they don't know what matters yet. Before she left, she looked around the house like she was seeing it with new eyes. "It feels peaceful here now," she said. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That afternoon I drove to the grocery store, took my time down each aisle, picked out things I actually wanted to eat, not just what was on a list handed to me or what someone else thought I could afford. I stopped by the butcher's counter and asked for a thick ribeye, something I hadn't done in years. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow, smiled, and said, "Celebrating something?" I said, "Yeah, myself." That night, I grilled it in the backyard with the radio on low and the porch light just barely glowing behind me. I sat down at the patio table, sliced into that steak, and ate every bite with gratitude. Not for the food, but for the man who finally decided he was allowed to enjoy something without guilt. The next morning, I passed by the mirror in the hallway and caught my reflection. I stopped. Not because I looked different, but because I finally looked familiar. The man staring back at me wasn't waiting for permission. He wasn't waiting for someone to hand him back what they'd taken. He was calm, still, whole. I stood there a while longer than usual, then went outside to water the plants. The garden had started growing faster than I expected. The little sprouts I planted weeks ago were taller now, stronger, standing up like they had something to say. I talked to them sometimes, not because I believed they could hear me, but because I needed to hear myself. I told them about the people I'd let go, the anger I'd buried, the space I'd cleared. I told them they were proof that something broken can still bloom, and I meant it. That week, I got a call from the community center. They wanted me to speak at the next gathering. "Just a few minutes," the woman said, "about life, or aging, or anything you've learned that you think others should hear." I told her I'd think about it, but deep down, I already knew what I'd say. I'd say that silence isn't weakness, that distance can be mercy, that sometimes love means walking away because staying would be betrayal, not of the other person, but of yourself. I'd say that healing isn't loud, and strength doesn't always wear boots. Sometimes it wears a flannel shirt and walks slow but steady to the mailbox every morning with its head held high. The night before the gathering, I sat by the window with a pencil in hand and wrote down one sentence. You have the right to be at peace in your own home. I underlined it twice. The next day, I put on a clean shirt, laced up my shoes, and stood in front of a room full of men who looked like me, tired, wrinkled, wise, worn. And when it was my turn, I didn't read from a page. I just spoke. I told them about the day my son called me useless, about the door I closed and the one I opened inside myself. I told them about the garden, about Lily, about how quiet can be a gift if you stop fearing it. And when I finished, the room was silent. Not because they were shocked, but because they understood. One man came up to me afterward and said, I've been sleeping in the basement of my own house for 3 years. I think it's time I moved upstairs again. I patted his shoulder and said, You deserve to feel like a man in your own home. That evening, back on my porch, I watched the sky turn gold and thought about all the things I hadn't lost. Not really. My voice, my name, my space, my peace. Eric hadn't taken any of that. I had just forgotten I could still reach for it. And now that I had, I wasn't letting go. I hadn't planned on seeing Eric again. Not ever. After that last visit on the porch, the door had closed not just physically, but in my heart. I figured he'd fade out, the way people do when they've said too much and done too little. I didn't hate him. I just no longer expected anything from him. And honestly, that's what peace looks like when you're old. It's not about forgiveness with ribbons. It's about release. Letting go of what hurts because carrying it costs more than it's worth. So I kept living. Quietly. Proudly. One slow and steady day at a time. One morning, I was walking back from the mailbox with a few bills and a church newsletter when I saw his car parked a few houses down. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't pacing. He was just sitting there. Alone. I stood on my porch, watching. He didn't move, and neither did I. After a few minutes, he started the engine and drove away. I didn't wave. He didn't look back. That's the closest we came to a goodbye. And it was enough. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's just the decision not to open the door again. That week, I finished clearing the garage. I donated the old tools I no longer used, boxed up things that didn't belong to me anymore, and swept the floor clean. There was something deeply satisfying about making space. Physical space, emotional space. I rearranged the shelves, fixed the overhead light, even hung a small radio above the workbench. It played soft old tunes while I oiled a box of fishing reels. Not for Eric, not for anyone else. Just because I wanted to. Because I still had plans, still had places to go, still had breath left in these lungs, and no one was going to waste it for me. On Saturday, Lily and Henry came by with donuts and lemonade. Lily brought a photo she had printed from the school project. Me, sitting on the porch, smiling with a notebook in my lap. She framed it and said, "So you remember who you are." I didn't cry, but I felt something break open and heal all at once. We sat outside for hours, telling stories, laughing, eating sticky powdered donuts with our hands. Henry asked if I ever missed the way things were. I looked him right in the eyes and said, "Not anymore." He nodded slowly, like a man much older than 11. That boy's got depth in him. That night, I took the frame and placed it on the hallway table, just below the wedding picture. One photo of who I was. One photo of who I became. And I realized the real story wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I refused to lose. My voice, my worth, my name on the front of this house. I had been called useless, forgotten, left out, but I was still here, still standing, still Harold. A few days later, I got a call from the local radio station. One of the volunteers from the men's group had told them about my speech. They asked if I'd come in and record a segment for a series they were doing on everyday wisdom from real people. I laughed at first, told them I wasn't exactly a poet, but they said I had something better. Truth. So I went, sat in front of a mic in a little dusty booth and talked like I was sitting on my porch. I told the story, just like I lived it, not dressed up, not dressed down, just honest. When I left, the young producer shook my hand and said, That's the kind of thing people need to hear. By the end of the month, My little garden had bloomed beyond expectation. The tomatoes were heavy on the vine, the basil thick and fragrant, and the marigolds so bright they looked like sparks in the dirt. I started giving some away to neighbors, packing small bags with care. I'd hang them on doorknobs or hand them out at the diner, and folks started calling me the Tomato Man. I didn't mind. I was building something again, not just plants, but presence. A legacy that had nothing to do with money or inheritance, just kindness, just roots in good soil. Then came the letter. Not from Eric, from a lawyer. It was a formal release of all shared accounts, all claims on my property. No note, no message, just signed documents and silence. It was, in a way, his final gesture. Not reconciliation, just retreat. I took the letter, signed my part, and mailed it back, not with bitterness, with certainty. He had his path, I had mine. And sometimes, the kindest thing a man can do is stop hoping someone changes and start living like it doesn't matter if they do. The last weekend of the season, I invited Jim and a few of the guys from the circle over for coffee and pie. We sat on the porch with paper plates in our laps, watching the sun go down over the neighborhood. There was laughter, quiet, a kind of invisible understanding between men who had all carried their share of silence. One of them asked me what changed. I looked out at the sky, then back at them and said, I stopped trying to prove I mattered, and I just started mattering to myself. They all nodded. Nobody needed to say more than that, and that's why I'm telling you this now. Because maybe someone out there needs to hear it too. You don't have to wait for a thank you, or an apology, or a seat at a table that makes you feel small. You don't have to shrink just because someone you love forgot how to see you. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is turning toward yourself and saying, you still count. So now I ask you, has this story made you think about your own? Has it touched something in you that needed a name? Then tell me, what would you have done in my place? And let me know. Where are you listening from, my friend? Because from where I'm sitting, life is just beginning again.